In the news tonight, His Majesty the King swears in a new government 3 weeks after unprecedented consultation with Prime Minister-designate Abdullah Mansour with parliamentary blocs and civic society leaders. Palestinians demonstrate across the West Bank and Gaza to mark Land Day and commemorate the death of 6 Arabs killed in protests against Israel's confiscation of land in 1976. And North Korea says it is entering a state of war with South Korea in a escalation of angry rhetoric directed at Seoul and Washington. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King swore in a new government 3 weeks after unprecedented consultations by Prime Minister-designate Abdullah Mansour with parliamentary blocs and civic society leaders. A royal decree appointed Mansour as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense and named the ministerial team upon his nomination as follows. Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research. Nasser Joudeh, Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs. Hussein Al-Majali, Minister of Interior and Minister of Municipal Affairs. Mohammed Al-Wahsh, Minister of Education. Hatem Al-Halawani, Minister of Industry, Trade, Supply and Minister of Information and Communications Technology. Hazem Al-Nasser, Minister of Water, Irrigation and Minister of Agriculture. Umayya Tuqan, Minister of Finance. Khalif Al-Khawalde, Minister of Public Sector Development. Muhammad Al-Qadha, Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. Nidal Qatamin, Minister of Labour and Minister of Transport. Ahmad Ziyadat, Minister of Justice and Minister of Prime Ministry Affairs. Walid Al-Masri, Minister of Public Works and Housing. Brahim Saif, Minister of Planning and International Cooperation and Minister of Tourism and Antiquities. Muhammad Al-Momani, Minister of State for Information Affairs and Minister of Political and Parliamentary Affairs. Reem Abu Hassan, Minister of Social Development. Mjallim Haylan, Minister of Health and Minister of Environment. Malik Al-Kabariti, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources. Barakat Ojan, Minister of Culture. In a reply to King Abdullah's letter of designation, the Prime Minister said his government will be committed to translating His Majesty's vision for democratic transformation and future parliamentary governments. His team will work closely with their colleagues in the legislative body and will continue to follow an approach of dialogue and consultation with all national powers as well as political parties and to seek broader public participation in decision-making. He also pledged serious and collective effort to upgrade public services and ensure equal outreach to all citizens of health and education services as well as training and employment opportunities. Mansour said his government will be loyal to fundamentals of the White Revolution His Majesty has called for by being transparent and accountable and believing in justice, merit and equality, waging a serious war against corruption, wasta and nepotism, in addition to maintaining close contact with citizens through fieldwork. Mansour said the difficult economic conditions Jordan is facing will be an incentive for hard work, using an economic reform program to confront challenges and promote growth, as well as to combat poverty, unemployment, and protect consumers. And so it also said that in the near future, he will be seeking the contribution of deputies in executive responsibility as a gradual progression towards parliamentary governments. In a statement following the swearing-in, Mansour told reporters that reform inspired and led by His Majesty the King must succeed on all fronts.
هذه هي الحكومة البرلمانية التي وعد بها صاحب الجلالة.
This is the parliamentary government that His Majesty the King has promised, in that it was created following parliamentary consultations. Although I believe this is not satisfactory, not yet. This is the smallest cabinet since 1972, and therefore there will be room for deputies to take part. In the coming months, a number of deputies will gradually join the government after we have had the time to get to know one another. That is when the selection will be sound rather than based on hasty decisions, because we want to ensure a successful process.
His Majesty the King had earlier met with members of the resigned cabinet and thanked them for their efforts in office. Palestinians demonstrated across the West Bank and Gaza to mark Land Day. The central events were held in the northern Arab-Israeli town of Sachin and the Negev. Land Day commemorates the killing of 6 Arabs in 1976 during protests against the confiscation of their land in Israel's Galilee region. Mohammed Al-Fuqaha has more.
Arab Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza held rallies today, commemorating the 37th anniversary of Land Day. The annual demonstrations marked the deaths of 6 Arab Israeli protesters at the hands of Israeli police and troops during mass protests in 1976 against plans to confiscate Arab land in the northern Galilee region. And the West Bank town of Qalandia, clashes erupted as protesters towards the Qalandia checkpoint, throwing stones at the soldiers who responded with volleys of tear gas. In Bethlehem, demonstrators marched towards the barrier that separates Israel from the West Bank.
The event today is to knock at the gates of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the compass of the Palestinians. Now, land is being confiscated in Jerusalem, and there is also ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian residents of Jerusalem. Also, in the West Bank, there is settlement building and the separation and the racist wall.
Several Palestinian factions also held a rally to mark the day in Gaza, while at Khan Yunis in the south, olive trees were planted in commemoration. Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhri said the group aimed to reclaim all Palestinian land.
For sure, we have chosen the options of resistance until we have liberated every last piece of our Palestinian land. On this anniversary, we affirm that Palestinian is for the Palestinian and the Arabs and the Muslims, not for the Jews.
Palestinians also rallied in the northern Israeli town of Sachin to mark the occasion and remember the Palestinian martyrs killed in defense of Palestinian lands. On the outskirts of Jerusalem, a separate march also took place to mark the occasion. Palestinian member of the Israeli Knesset, Ahmed Al-Tibi, said local people were becoming increasingly frustrated with the Israeli authorities. He said it is the first time Beit Safafa is commemorating Land Day with such an angry march. The reason is road number 4 and the confiscation of land. He added that Beit Safafa is not alone and that Beit Safafa is the same as Tibe and Sachin and the Negev. Since the confrontations between Israeli security forces and Palestinians during the events of 1976, March 30th has become a Palestinian commemoration day, also marked with a week of protests in the West Bank and Gaza. Mohammed Al-Fuqaha for the News at 10.
Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan praised the Syrian opposition, saying its efforts to further unite and form a transitional government has won it a greater legitimacy. His remarks came during meeting of the Syria Turkmen Assembly in Ankara. Erdogan said Turkey will not keep silent regarding the oppression that Syrian Turkmen are exposed to. He also said it is very important for the Turkmen to have representation in a new cabinet following the eventual fall of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. Erdogan also noted that such an assembly could reinforce the awareness among Turkmen people of constituting a political group and set an important precedent for similar associations in the region. Chairman of Syrian National Council George Sabra said the opposition was disappointed by the weak reactions of the international community after they elected a provisional prime minister.
Still waiting more and more. Right now, only we get a little react. You know what happened deserves more and more, especially we need to see something on the ground, not only statements, promises, announcements. We need to see something on the ground, especially in military field, military support.
Italian President Giorgia Lotano ruled out he would stand down to make way for new parliamentary elections after failed attempts to form a government this week. He said he would stay in place until the end of his mandate in May and urged politicians not to underestimate the crisis in Italy. The 87-year-old head of state told reporters he would continue his efforts to break the deadlock since elections last month that left no group with enough power to form a government. He said he will ask two small groups to formulate proposals for institutional and economic, social and European reforms that can be supported by all political parties. Yesterday, Napolitano met leaders of the main parties to try to find a way out of the stalemate, which has raised fears of prolonged uncertainty in the Eurozone's third largest economy. North Korea says it is entering a state of war with South Korea in a continuing escalation of angry rhetoric directed at Seoul and Washington. In a further show of force, North Korea threatened to shut down an industrial zone it operates jointly with the South over perceived insults that the complex is only being kept running to raise money for the impoverished state. The threat to shut it down sharply escalate tensions because it would suspend a symbolic joint project run by the two rivals. Laith Shanqiti has more in the following report.
South Korea's defense ministry said North Korea's declaration that it was entering a state of war with Seoul is unacceptable. The defense ministry urged the North to stop issuing threats.
North Korea's continuing against South Korea, such as saying it is entering a state of war, are never acceptable since it is harming peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Our recent military exercises, such as Key Resolve and Fall Eagle, and the U.S. strategic bombers deployment on the peninsula, were defensive in nature against North Korea's possible provocations.
Despite its threats, new people see any indication Pyongyang will risk a near certain defeat by restarting a full-scale war. North Korea has been threatening to attack the South and U.S. military bases almost on daily basis since the beginning of the month, when U.S. and South Korean militaries started routine drills. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed off on an order putting its missile units on standby to attack U.S. military bases in the South and the Pacific, after the United States flew two nuclear-capable stealth bombers over the Korean peninsula in a rare show of force. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov harshly criticized military activity near North Korea, warning the situation may slip out of control. He also said North Korea should cool down too, calling on all sides not to flex military muscle.
In this case, we are concerned that along with the adequate reactions of the United Nations Security Council and the collective reactions of the world community, unilateral action is being taken around North Korea that is increasing military activity. We can let the situation simply out of control, and this will spiral into a vicious cycle.
Tensions have been high since North Korea conducted a third nuclear weapons test in February in breach of UN sanctions. Laith Shanqiti for the news at 10.
South Africa's anti-apartheid hero Nelson Mandela is comfortable and able to breathe without problems as he continues to treatment in hospital for a recurrence of pneumonia. After the Reverend, a 94-year-old statesman and former president, spent a third night in hospital, President Jacob Zuma's office issued a statement saying doctors had drained excess fluid from Mandela's lungs to tackle an infection. This was the first detailed mention of Mandela's medical condition since his latest hospitalization, the third in months. Mandela became South Africa's first black president in 1994. Since stepping down 5 years ago, he has been absent from the political scene, but he remains an enduring and beloved symbol of the struggle against racism. Global figures have sent get-well messages, and South Africans have included Mandela in their prayers on the Easter weekend. U.S. President Barack urged people to rededicate themselves to interests larger than their own, to embrace their loved ones and give thanks for their blessings as they celebrate Easter. In his weekly radio address, Obama extended best wishes for Easter, celebrated tomorrow by Catholics across the world. And in yearly tradition spanning more than 100 years, on Monday the First Family will welcome more than 35,000 people to the South Lawn of the White House for the annual White House Easter egg roll.
In the midst of all our busy and noisy lives, these holy days afford us the precious opportunity to slow down and spend some quiet moments in prayer and reflection, to loving our Lord and Savior, to loving our neighbors, and to seeing everyone, especially the least of these, as a child of God. Those values are at the heart of not just the Christian faith, but of all faiths. From Judaism to Islam, Hinduism to Sikhism, their echoes a powerful call to serve our brothers and sisters, to keep in our hearts a deep and abiding compassion for all, and to treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
We stay in the U.S., and a baby gorilla whose mother has rejected her after birth in January is raised by human surrogates at Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens. The gorilla, named Gladys, is being cared for by a human parent after being transferred from a Texas zoo where she was born. 10 human surrogates are caring for the baby gorilla until one of the zoo's female gorillas assumed the role of surrogate, which could take several months. These surrogates try to mimic what a gorilla mother would do with her baby, including crawling around dressed in a black furry vest, making gorilla sounds with the nearly 5 kilograms Gladys clinging to their backs. Zoo officials say Gladys is doing well, developing and growing quickly. She has begun to support herself on all fours, is teething, and has begun eating some cooked foods, such as sweet potatoes and carrots. And before we move to sports, we leave you with these scenes of a massive highway pileup on a Swiss road. About 50 vehicles were involved in the pileup on a road leading to a ski resort in eastern Switzerland. 8 people received light injuries as a result of the pileup, which investigators blamed on speeding in thick fog. We begin with tennis and the Sony Open. Britain's Andy Murray reached the final of the tournament, ousting France's Richard Gasquet. Although Gasquet has been playing some inspired tennis, he was outplayed in the second set and the Scotsman never looked in danger in the third. Murray fought back for a 6-7, 6-1, 6-2 win and set up a meeting against Spaniard David Ferrer. Ferrer, on the other hand, ended German Tommy Haas's dream of reaching the final with a 4-6, 6-2, 6-3 victory. After Haas clinched the first set, Ferrer fought back and turned things around, taking advantage of some unforced errors. While Ferrer is bidding to lift his second Masters 1000 victory, a win by Murray over him in the finals would move the Scotsman above Roger Federer into second place in the world rankings. The world's fastest man, Usain Bolt, hit the beach in Rio de Janeiro for his first walkthrough on a racetrack built on. The 6-time Olympic champion launches his season tomorrow, where he will square off against 3 other world-class sprinters in a 150-meter exhibition race down the track. The track was specially built atop the golden sands of Rio's iconic Copacabana beach. Tomorrow's race will conclude Bolt's short publicity tour of Rio de Janeiro, host to the 2016 Summer Olympics. And finally, to the weather outlook. Fair and partly cloudy tonight with southeasterly light winds. As for tomorrow, a relatively hot day that could get dusty is expected as temperatures rise further. Winds will be southeasterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in the eastern regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect pleasant weather tonight, but definitely hot conditions tomorrow with southerly winds and slightly high seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King swears in a new government 3 weeks after unprecedented consultations by Prime Minister-designate Abdullah Mansour with parliamentary blocs and civic society leaders. Palestinians demonstrate across the West Bank and Gaza to mark Land Day and commemorate the death of 6 Arabs killed in protests against Israel's confiscation of land in 1976. And North Korea says it is entering a state of war with South Korea in a continuing escalation of rhetoric directed at Seoul and Washington. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.